Our first scripture lesson is from Psalms chapter 106, verses 1 to 6, and 19 to 23. This is found in your Pew Bible on page 944.
Praise the Lord. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Who can utter the mighty doings of the Lord, or declare all his praises? Happy are those who observe justice, who do righteousness at all times. Remember me, O Lord, when you show favor to your people. Help me when you deliver them, that I may see the prosperity of your chosen ones, that I may rejoice in the gladness of your nation, that I may glory in your heritage. Both we and our ancestors have sinned. We have committed iniquity, have done wickedly. They made a calf at Horeb and worshipped the cast image. They exchanged the glory of God for the image of an ox that eats grass. They forgot God, their Savior, who had done great things in Egypt, wondrous works in the land of Ham, and awesome deeds by the Red Sea. Therefore he said he would destroy them. Had not Moses, his chosen one, stood in the breach before him to turn away his wrath from destroying them. Please remain seated and join me in singing our prayer for illumination, verse 1 of Spirit of the Living God, number 492.
The second lesson this morning comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 32, verses 1 through 14. It's on page 136 if you want to follow in your Pew Bible. Just to catch you up on what's going on, Moses and the Israelites are in that part of their story when they are wandering in the wilderness, in the desert, and God has called Moses to go up onto a mountain. They're going to have a little talk. Moses is going to receive the 10 Commandments and come back down to the people. But Moses has been gone at this point for a little bit longer than they expected, about 40 days. So that's where our story picks up. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come on, make gods for us who will go before us. As for this Moses, this man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him." And Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters and bring them to me." And so all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he took the gold and formed it in a mold and cast an image of a calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord." And they rose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel. Now the Lord said to Moses, "Go down at once. Your people, who you brought up out of Egypt, have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way I commanded them. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf, and have worshipped it, and sacrificed to it, and have said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" The Lord said to Moses, "I have seen these people, how stiff-necked they are. Now leave me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. And out of you I will make a great nation." But Moses implored the Lord his God and said, "O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that you brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath. Change your mind and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, how you swore to them by your own self, saying to them, 'I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven And all this land that I have promised I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he had planned to bring on his people. This is the word of God.
Thanks be to God.
How did we get here? It's a question that I find myself asking more and more these days. How did we get here? Our country feels more divided than ever. Natural disasters are too numerous to even remember. The threat of nuclear war, unimaginably, may again be a reality. One man with an adapted rifle killed 58 people from his hotel room balcony. Football has become the center of the political conversation. And the military have fired shots at our own innocent family members in Cameroon. How did we get here? Sometimes we ask this question in our personal lives as well, right? We find ourselves facing a frustrating medical diagnosis or a lack thereof. We feel at odds with our own body. How did we get here? Or we find ourselves drowning in debt with no clear way out. Or we realize a relationship has been lost, not out of meanness or any disagreement, but just a failure to pay attention to it. How did we get here? The answer to that question is always complicated. There was a letter issued this week from the Presbyterian Church in Cameroon, from their moderator, Reverend Funky Samuel Forba. And I heard echoes of that question in his letter. In Cameroon, in the English-speaking region, school is still not in session since last winter. The powerful positions in the country are occupied by French-speaking people from the French-speaking region who are oppressing and now violently controlling the English-speaking region. In the middle of a letter full of prayers for peace and hope for Christian witness in this time of terror and war, you can feel Reverend Forba wondering, how did we get here? And so he reminds us of the treaty that called this country together out from under colonial control and into independence. He writes, the Presbyterian Church in Cameroon, the PCC, affirms the legitimacy of the Anglophone grievances. The PCC recognizes the bona fide coming together of two sovereign peoples on October 1st, 1961. However, the deliberate deleting of the Anglophone culture, dignity, and values, amongst many other intentional political manipulations, are attempts to hide a historical fact that once upon a time, two peoples mutually agreed to live together under international legal instruments. There's something so powerful in that statement to me when I read it. Despite all of the hell that we have gone through, he writes, we remember that we were once two peoples who mutually agreed to live together. How did we get here? The reading from Exodus this morning might be familiar to you from your Sunday school days. Perhaps you had a coloring sheet with a calf featured prominently in the front and a mountain in the background where Moses is meeting God. Yeah. If it has indeed been that long, we should probably go back and review kind of what is going on. The main event in Exodus is, of course, the Exodus. The people left. The people of God had become slaves in Egypt, living in terrible conditions, but apparently flourishing, because the Pharaoh feared there were too many of them, and he told the midwives not to let the Israelite babies live. Now, two brave women stood up to Pharaoh, the midwives Shiphrah and Puah, and they kept baby Moses alive and placed him in a basket on the river. And that's where Pharaoh's daughter found him and pulled him to safety. When Moses grows up, he has a formative experience witnessing the violence inflicted on his people by the Egyptian elite. And God calls him out of the comfort and safety of his position as Pharaoh's daughter's adopted son And Moses becomes kind of the community organizer of the Israelites, telling them that they don't have to live this way, that God will save them. Now, Pharaoh, of course, is not super happy to see his workforce up and walk out. And so when Moses goes to negotiate with him, the Pharaoh's heart is hardened, and he will not let the people go. Then follow the 10 plagues. You remember those from Sunday school, right? Locusts and boils and water turned to blood, all that stuff. And finally, the Egyptians get so fed up with this that they throw God's people out and tell them, please don't come back. It's not long afterward, however, that the Pharaoh realizes the consequences of his hasty decision, his dismissal of the country's free labor. And so he changes his mind and sets out with an army to capture them, these escaped slaves. A group of ragtag poor folks against the Pharaoh's army, they don't stand a chance until, that is, they reach the sea, and Pharaoh plants his staff, and Moses plants his staff in the ground, and the waters part, and the people walk through on dry land, and the waters close back over, defeating Pharaoh's army and ensuring the Israelites' safety. I don't know that we really get to the power of this liberation, of this life-changing, saving action of God. We come close to it sometimes when a person who is addicted finds sobriety, when a person who is abused makes a decision to leave a harmful relationship, when we finish paying a debt or find a job or get into college, when we come to terms with the love of God that absolutely grips us. We know some of what these folks felt that day, the elation, the relief, the hope. And then the real world comes crashing back in. It's only a few days before the people realize they are going to be walking this desert for a while, and they don't have enough water. Moses, did you bring us out into the desert to die? They whine. And miraculously, Moses hits a rock with his staff and water springs out. But this wonder is not sustaining either, and soon the people are even complaining about the repetitive nature of their diets since this manna thing has started falling out of the sky. How quickly they forgot just how they got there. Now God realizes that if this rescue of God's people is going to be sustainable, they're going to have to get some structure in place. So God calls Moses up on this mountain to have a little talk about some ground rules that might help these people live up to their identity as God's own people. And it finally seems like maybe there's going to be some forward motion in the story, but Moses ends up on that mountain for something like 40 days. I don't know if he was chiseling the 10 Commandments himself or what, but the people thought it was way, way too long. I have to say, I don't really blame Aaron at all, having to be in charge of these annoying, complaining people who are saying, fine, give me your gold and we'll make something for you to worship and we'll get you to stop complaining. And no one, it appears, took a moment to ask, how did we get here? Because they take their gold earrings, the very symbols of their slavery, and they make them into something to worship. It's crystal clear, in fact, that they've forgotten how they got there when Aaron declares to the people, motioning to these golden idols, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And then follows the conversation between Moses and God that I think is one of the Bible's best comedy numbers. God sounds just like so many parents when their spouse arrives home after a particularly hard day. Listen to what your child did, right? Has anyone ever said that? Moses, God complains, your people have acted perversely. Move over so I can destroy them all. But this time it's Moses who remembers to stop and ask, wait, how did we get here? Remember, he asks God, Remember Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Israel and Rachel? Remember those people to whom you made a promise that you would turn them into a great nation, your own people? And God, grudgingly perhaps, remembers. And God's mind is changed. Friends, how did we get here? My favorite verse of Amazing Grace is not the first one, the most well-known, but it's the one that goes, "Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Twas grace that kept me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." Whether it is the world in general or our lives in specific that we wonder about when we shake our heads and say, how did we get here? There is one place we can always begin. Just like our Cameroonian brother who urges a people at war to remember they once committed to one another, God calls us to remember who we really are. We are God's own children. We are free, liberated from the power of sin and death in this world. We are loved without condition or manipulation. And we have known God to be faithful in our lives. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. We have these stories of deliverance, of liberation, of survival. It's the story Edinmar told us last week, so many immigrants' story, when he said, God brought me to this day to a new life I could not have imagined because I would not give up believing. It's the story that Pat tells of being sober, of the deep hope that she has that God has something for her to do yet in this world. It is Judith's testimony that the day she asked Christ into her heart was the last night she cried herself to sleep. How did we get here? By the power and the forgiveness and the grace and the love of God. So much, I know so much is wrong in our bodies, in our families, in our countries, in our world. How did we get here? It is truly complicated. But we are not powerless. If we can just remember, if we can just call back the memory to our conscious minds that we are God's own children, freed and loved and filled with the power of God's own Spirit, friends, we are powerful beyond measure because God is powerful beyond measure. In the midst of doubt, in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of war, we can stand strong, surely rooted in the promise of God that the way things are now is not the way things have to be. And that God is at work in the world, and that God is at work in us, so that someday we might find ourselves rejoicing, celebrating, at peace, and we might remember just how we got there. Friends, for peace, for healing, for rejoicing, let us pray to the Lord.
Amen.